Welcome to the Animal Training Fundamentals Podcast, where we have fun with practical application and we get mental with the science of behavior. Put them both together and you get results, solutions for your behavior problems, and the tools you need to achieve your training goals. I'm your host, Barbara Heidenreich. Let's talk training. Hey, animal trainers, it's Barbara Heidenreich. Good to be with you again. It's been a while, hasn't it? And I'm going to do this one all on my own. I've been enjoying interviewing guests for quite a while now, but it's been a while since I've done one on my own, and we're just going to have a nice little intimate podcast, just you and me. So what have I picked for a topic this time around? I've picked managing your environment. Now, sometimes people like to call this antecedent arrangement, but antecedents to me involve a lot more things than just the items in your environment. So that's why I'm calling this managing your environment. Now, what does that mean to me exactly? Well, let's get into it. When I think about managing your environment, I'm talking about how can we arrange the actual things in your environment or the space itself so that we can facilitate getting the action that we want, getting the behavior that we want. And this is a really important part of our training strategy. And for me, one of the parts that I really enjoy because we really get to be creative. So for me, I always look at this as a little bit of a challenge and I enjoy it so much. I love thinking about it before we even get started with our shaping plan. So this is one of the things that I like to think about. I actually have a few steps when I think about it. I think about how can we make it easy to help get the action we want so that we can reinforce that action. That's a really important part of any part of our shaping plans, or even if we're capturing a behavior, because the more movement that the animal has to make, the more motivation it requires out of the animal. So we want to make it super, super easy for that animal to do that first little tiny approximation, or if we're capturing the behavior, that first little action, whatever it is that we're trying to get out of the animal. And this also requires us to really think about the natural history of the species. And so what I mean by that is you're going to be thinking about the physiology of the species. You're going to be thinking about physics here. It really takes a lot of skill sets on the part of the animal trainer. We are not just animal trainers, are we? We are ethologists here. We're engineers. And this is where sometimes I think, boy, I wish I had more skill sets in my toolbox. Sometimes we're having to draw things, so you have to be a good artist. Sometimes you wish you were a computer animator because you wish you could take that thing that you have in your head and put it out on a computer screen, or you have to pull in some of your friends that are really skilled at that so that they can make what you have in your head come to life in a diagram. And then you go to that guy who's really good at building stuff over in another department that can build those things for you. You know what I'm talking about here, don't you? And then what we try to do is we try to create that really perfect setup so that your animal doesn't really have to do very much to give you the results that you want. And basically what it comes down to, it takes very little training on your part to get the action that you want, because you've basically created this environment, this physical environment, so that your animal almost magically does the action that you want so that you can reinforce it. So you're not relying so much on what you know about principles of reinforcement or your principles and procedures that we know about in applied behavior analysis to get an animal to do a behavior. You're really talking about physics and engineering and physiology and moving objects in a certain way so that the animal can give you the action that you want. That's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about managing your environment. So let's break this down a little bit more and look at some examples and look at the details. Okay, let's start with the objects that you use to train. We're going to look at some objects that you could modify so that it makes it really easy for your animal to do the action that you want so that you can reinforce that behavior. I'm going to take a really simple one that a lot of us might do. What about scale training? I am such a crazy nut job when it comes to being particular about scales. And I think sometimes, especially when I'm working with the veterinary community, they think I'm insane when I talk about scales, but I'm really picky about scales because if you have the perfect scale, if you've chosen the exact perfect scale, you're going to have such an easier time getting that behavior. And especially when we're in situations, let's say, for example, where the animal's coming to a veterinary clinic and that animal may not be trained to get onto a scale. You're trying to collect data, you're trying to collect a weight with an animal that may not have a reinforcement history with getting on a scale. And so you're trying to perhaps get that information in the least stressful way. And if you have a scale that makes it super, super easy for that animal to get on a scale, even though the animal's not trained for the behavior, you can still get that action without having to put a lot of work into it, without a lot of training. If you've got the right scale, the animal's potentially going to get on that scale without much effort on your part if you have the right scale. But if you have a scale that is just challenging for that animal to get onto, you've just made it that much harder. So that's why when I see those baby scales that are kind of like a cradle and they're elevated off the ground and you literally are going to have to scoop up the animal to put it on there, you've already put the animal in a situation where you've created a lot more stress than there has to be. So what are some of the things that I look for when I'm looking for a great scale to train an animal to get onto it? Typically, I'm thinking about things that are low to the ground because most of our animals are going to be walking across that scale. I'm looking for a scale that has a non-skid surface. If the scale surface is slippery, most animals are not going to be comfortable with that. And I can't think of really one species that's going to want to walk across a slippery scale. I don't know. It doesn't matter if you're talking about a small mammal, if you're talking about a bird, if you're talking about a reptile, if you're talking about hoofstock. I can't think of really one animal that's going to be going, yay, slippery surface. I also think about a low center of gravity. If that scale is going to tip when the animal steps on the edge, perhaps, if it's working towards an approximation, that scale is immediately going to create a fear response for the animal. So I'm thinking about low center of gravity. I'm also thinking about traction on the bottom of the scale. What if that animal does put some weight on the scale and whoop, the scale slips out from underneath them? That's not going to work either. I also typically do not want obstacles on the sides around the edges of the scale. So some scales have like a beam that comes up on the side of the scale so that you can have maybe the digital readout up high. And you'll see that for scales like used in shipping and things like that. Now, for some animals, they may want to grab onto that. Think about primates. And now you've created a situation where now your weight is compromised because the animal's holding onto it. And for other animals, they may hit body parts on that. So I typically do not want that. We also want to think about platform size. Is your animal going to spill over the sides? Is your animal going to be able to wander all around the edges? And so you're not even going to have the animal in the center of the scale so that you get an accurate weight. And so that's going to require more training on your part. That's going to be a challenge. You may also need to create a ramp that goes up to your scale so that, again, it's going to be easier for your animal to get onto the scale. Or could you embed the scale so that it comes flush with the floor? I have this wonderful photograph. Maybe I can put this on the episode webpage from, I believe it's Cornell University, where they have embedded the scale in with the floor. And the floor and the scale are covered with rubberized flooring, and I believe this is for the hoof stock. So it's like for horses and cattle at Cornell University. And so if they were to bring a horse into that environment, the horse would not even notice that it's walked across the scale. I think that is so fantastic. That is the perfect scale, in my opinion. So these are all aspects to think about that could make the scale itself much more of a place where the animal is going to be more likely to engage with that scale. We've just made it a much more attractive place to be. It's going to take much less effort on anybody's part in terms of training strategies to get that animal to engage with that scale. We're going to take a little break to give you your first secret word. And the secret word is scale. SCALE. Secret words are important to remember and submit to show you have listened to this podcast for your professional development. Listening to podcasts are required for earning certain badges in the online learning program, animaltrainingfundamentals.com. All right, back to the program. Now let's think about that same thing if we were talking about maybe training an animal to do a hoof curl behavior. So same thing, the apparatus that we're going to use for training that behavior, we want to make sure that it has a non-skid surface. We may want to make sure that it's comfortable for the animal to place that body part on that. If it's a really hard surface, it may not be comfortable for the animal. Is it stable? Is it going to move around when the animal tries to engage with it? It might need to be just the right height for the species that you're working with. I know when we were working on this behavior at a facility in Russia, we were just grabbing whatever materials we had available to us, and one of them was a slice of a stump. And at first we were just really practicing, could we get giraffes to put their hoof flat on the block of wood? And we just got lucky in which one animal started to do the hoof curl behavior, so we started to reinforce for that. But what we noticed is that the top of the little stump was slick. And so the poor giraffe really was having a hard time trying to keep that curl behavior going because the foot just kept sliding off the block of the wood. And bless that giraffe's heart, as they say here in the South, that animal really was working hard to try and keep that foot in position, even though it kept sliding right off there, because that's what we were reinforcing. We were reinforcing for that curl, but the poor animal had to work really hard to keep that in position because of the slick surface. So obviously that's something we would want to modify so that the animal could be more successful. And again, having it just the right height for the species that you're working with, so it's really comfortable for the animal. Otherwise, you're in that same position where you're really having to reinforce heavily, or the animal has to be really, really motivated to try and do that behavior to have success. Let's look at another example. What about crate training? Here's another behavior that so many of us work on because it's one of those important foundation behaviors. If you have a crate that's slick inside, again, this could be a problem for an animal. I have a really nice example where we were working with a fox on crate training, and inside the crate, we didn't have any substrate, and this particular fox only had 3 legs, and so it was very nervous about going into the crate, I should add. And when it would walk into the crate, it would pretty much pop right back out. The minute we added a rubber mat inside the crate, that fox started slowing down. It had traction. So when you think about an animal that is showing a little bit of hesitancy, and the way that it escapes things that create fear responses is to run away, and we give it traction, that's going to increase its confidence. Now it has traction so that it can't escape if it wants to. And we really saw a complete change in this animal's behavior once it had traction inside the crate. And just adding that traction made a huge difference. Another thing I think about is working with a crate that the top can open. So I'm not meaning that the top of the crate comes off. Obviously, we can do that for making smaller approximations, but there are crates that have a door on the top. So this offers a great opportunity for us to present targets from the top. So if we have 2 doors, a door on the side and a door on the top, it gives us an opportunity to open from the top. That sometimes is helpful for some animals in terms of having more visibility. They don't feel so closed in, but we can also present a target from the top. So it gives us a way to create small approximations. We can present that target closer to the side door and then gradually teach the animal to come farther and farther into the crate. Again, we love to have that stable crate. If that crate is rocking on the surface, that might be more likely to create a fear response. And just like we talked about with the scale, does that crate have a big lip that the animal has to climb over to get into the crate? Could you create a ramp that makes it more easy for the animal to walk into that crate? That lip can be a huge barrier for some animals to voluntarily step into a crate. All these little details really can make a big difference. So we've talked a little bit about the objects that you're using. What about the environment in which you're training? We can look at the space in which you're training so that we can create the behavior that we want. A lot of times, if you look at your space, your enclosure, you can take advantage of your enclosure to help create the action that you want. So take, for example, creating a backup behavior. A great thing to do is take advantage of the fact that you have a chute, or you can even create a chute. You can do things like using furniture or equipment that's already in the enclosure to create a little bit of a chute. And by doing so, you've already created sort of a natural barrier that creates a sort of a line, a situation which your animal is already moving forwards and backwards. And then you can simply use targeting or having the animal follow you or luring to create the action that you want of either moving forwards or backwards, and then being able to reinforce that action. So you're basically using the natural environment to create the action that you want so that you can reinforce that. Same thing for creating situations in which you can have access to body parts. We do this a lot for doing situations in which we can create access to things like shoulders and hips when we're trying to create behaviors like injection training or getting position for behaviors like injection training. Another one I'd like to mention is when we're training for access to things like tails for blood draw behaviors. A really important one is trying to get that tail in a good position so that we get just the right positioning for a good blood draw. A lot of times people are trying to go from the side, but keep in mind that sometimes we have challenges with that because we don't often get great blood flow because the tail gets a little bit kinked up. So a lot of times people are taking advantage of things like platforms and teaching an animal to hop up onto a platform. And especially if you're working in a situation where the platform is in a corner, and if you can create the situation where your opening where the tail is coming out is straight on, you can have the situation where the tail is coming straight back and also coming down. And now you have the situation where you've got a vein that is straight and a vein that is also dropping down. And so now you have no kinking of the vein, and you also have blood flowing downward. So you're more likely to get a good stick and a good flow of blood, and you get a good blood draw. So little things like that can be created just by how you set up your environment instead of focusing so much on the process of training the exact behavior. So we've talked a little bit about how we can use the environment and the space that the animal lives in to create the action. But now let's think about the natural history of the species itself and how we can use that and the environment to create the behaviors that we want, or how that can create problems as well. So we've talked a little bit about things like crate training. And remember that when we crate train animals, we do really need to think about the natural history of the animals that we're working with. So in some cases, going into a crate could really be very reinforcing for an animal because some animals really do like to hide. So think about animals like guinea pigs who might go, yeah, going into a crate is going to be awesome. I love that dark place. So it might be really easy to get that animal to go into that space, especially if you make it really easy for them to crawl over that lip. There are some crates that don't even have a lip, that is just a door that kind of folds down, and the animal would just need to walk right over that flat door, and next thing you know, they're into a dark space. So that would work really well for them. And same thing for animals like an armadillo that might be wanting to go into that dark enclosed area, especially if there's a nice substrate that they can kind of dig into and burrow into. So again, those are the kinds of things we think about. How can we make this very comfortable for an animal like that based on their natural history? However, you also want to think about animals that might find an enclosed space too reinforcing. For me, I think about animals like parrots that may think, ooh, that would be a wonderful place to make babies. And I've definitely seen this where we've had a macaw go into a crate that was so dark and so enclosed. In fact, I think this crate was made out of wood, as I recall, that the animal thought, oh, yes, I'm going to make babies here. And the next thing you know, the trainer was having a lot of challenges working with the animal because it started to show aggressive behavior around the box because it started defending it like it was a nest site. So for those animals, it may not be appropriate to use a dark enclosed space. In fact, it might be better to use more like a wire crate that's very open and lots of visibility, so the animal's not beginning to think about turning it into a nest box. So you really need to look at the natural history of your species to make a determination what might be the ideal type of crate to train your animal to go into, or travel container, I should say. And sometimes it might be walking the line between something more enclosed or not so enclosed. It's really going to depend on your species. And another thing to always keep in mind too is that stability of the crate. We talk about keeping scales really stable because that's going to keep the animal more comfortable. And again, even when the animal goes into that crate, some animals, it's going to be really important that that crate is really, really steady and stable. Some animals may be okay with more movement, and some animals are really going to be, it's going to be really important to train them to be comfortable with the movement. So something that you're really going to want to take a look at. When we talk about scale training in natural history, you may also think about things like, should there be a perch on the scale? Some people are really comfortable training birds to walk onto a flat scale, but there are some birds where perching might make it more likely that they'd be comfortable sitting on a perch on top of a scale. And that's really going to depend on the species. So adding a perch may make it more likely that the bird will get on a scale. So that's something where you'll again need to look at the natural history of the species and see if that's going to contribute to you having success getting that behavior trained. Another cool behavior that really takes into consideration the natural history of the species is getting a big cat to put its paw into a sleeve. And a lot of you have probably seen that behavior with Copenhagen Zoo, who really were kind of the ones to bring that behavior to the forefront. And it all started with teaching a big cat to put their paw onto a target. And because big cats have a tendency to want to touch things with those front paws, it wasn't that difficult of a behavior to get started because of that natural history of the species. And then by adding a sleeve, it's very easy to just take that paw targeting behavior and include that sleeve as part of your environment. And next thing you know, you've got that behavior, and then that can evolve into other things like injection training and potentially even blood draws if you wanted to. And of course, health checks on those body parts. So again, we can really take advantage of the natural history of a species, combine it with creating our environment so that it's easy for the animal to do that behavior, have that sleeve at just the right height, include a lay down behavior that's in a very comfortable position for the animal. And next thing you know, you've got a behavior that's really useful for you. Time for your second secret word. And the secret word is shoot. C-H-U-T-E. Shoot. All right, let's get back to the program. So I hope you can see how managing your environment is not just about preventing behavior problems, although we certainly do that, but it's also about helping you get the behaviors that you want to get trained. And a lot of it is about figuring out the perfect object that's going to help you get the action you want so that you can reinforce that easily. It's also about looking at the space in which you're using to train that behavior. How can you use your space wisely? It's also about positioning your animal for really good comfort, making sure that your animal is going to be comfortable in that position. And it's also about positioning your animal to create that desired action. So using your space appropriately for comfort and for getting that action, using your objects and picking the right objects, and then you find yourself getting the action that you want so that you can reinforce it. And again, remember, this is just a small, tiny, tiny part of what we do to get behavior. And it's going to take you thinking about physics. It's going to think about engineering. It's going to be all about natural behavior. There's a lot of different parts that go into this. So you really have to be a creative trainer in here. But again, it's one of those fun parts of animal training. You really do get to be creative. And it's one of the parts that I really enjoy, and you really kind of get to bounce ideas off of each other. And again, the more that you're around animals, the more that you practice this, the more that these ideas will come to you. And I do encourage you to really think outside the box, get creative. You kind of have to have this mindset that there's no boundaries, because this is where the really cool ideas come from. Don't feel like, oh, well, it's never been done before, therefore we can't do it. Who says? You just got to go for it, because the next thing you know, you're going to come up with something really cool that's going to change the way we do things. And the next thing you know, everybody's going to be doing it the way that you do it, because you've come up with this really cool idea that changes the way that things are done. And that's one of the really amazing things about our industry. There, at this stage of the game, there's just a lot of innovation coming out, and people are coming up with really great, fantastic ideas to train behaviors. And who knows, maybe your idea could be the next one that changes the way we do things. So go for it is all I can say. All right. Well, I hope those ideas helped you out. I did want to tell you all that I do have some exciting news. If you haven't heard, I am hosting a very exciting event called the Global Animal Training Summit, and it's called GOATS for short. It's coming up October 25th and 26th. And you may say, what the heck is this all about? It's a 2-day virtual event catered towards professionals and aspiring animal training professionals who work with exotic animals in managed care. This event is primarily focused on providing attendees with information designed to enhance your practical application skills and knowledge. And we have amazing speakers. I hope you will check this out. We really do have amazing speakers. We have Jerry Creighton from the Dublin Zoo, Annetta Peterson from the Copenhagen Zoo, Jim Mackey from the London Zoo, Hilary Hankey from Avian Behavior International, and scientist and animal trainer Dr. Perveen Farhoudi. And of course, I'll be speaking as well. And get this, we're also going to have live training demos. We also have a mastermind session where we're going to discuss a hot topic in animal training. We've got drawings for really cool donations from our sponsors. Let me tell you about the sponsors. We've got a whole bunch of them, but I'm going to tell you about 3 in particular. They were handpicked. I really wanted to choose sponsors that I believe in. So 3 of them I really want to talk about. Animal Care Software. They provide digital software so that you can track just about everything you can imagine in your collection. And one of the really cool things that they've come out with is a way to digitally track and measure animal welfare. Like, who does that? This is so cool. And so you'll get to check out more about that when you register. We also have feed pods supporting. They provide 24-hour enrichment devices that you can literally operate from your phone no matter where you are. Like, you can be in the other side of the world and you can push a button on your phone and provide enrichment for your animals. Some of you may have seen a video in my consulting work where we used feed pods to train gibbons to shift. Like, we were literally standing on a bridge, and as the animals started going towards their inside holding, we could push a button, and that acted as a bridging stimulus to reinforce their approximations towards shifting. It was so cool. And then we also have animal equipment by Stony. I don't know if you guys notice, but in my little training bag that I carry with me, I have tons of supplies from Animal Equipment by Stoning that I carry with me around the world. So all 3 of these companies are offering special opportunities to the people that register for the live event, and you guys will get to enjoy their products and services as well. So registration for GOATS is open. All you have to do is go to atfgoats.com, and you will see a link for that on a podcast episode webpage for more information. You really don't want to miss this event. I still can't believe it. If you go to the Facebook event page, you will see, last time I looked, there was over 600 people that had expressed interest in attending this event, and we are 2 months away. I can't believe it. So you all got to get on this. and come join us. It's going to be amazing. I'm super excited myself. I hope you all enjoyed this podcast and got some tips that you can apply to your animal training. And I look forward to talking training with you again soon. Talk to you later. If you liked what you heard today, visit animaltrainingfundamentals.com for more quality content on animal training. You'll find courses, community, and extensive video examples from my consulting work around the world. We'd love to have you join our force-free family.